Okay, welcome to the gallery abominate for facial fat. We have a reasonably quick gallery abominate this week. Look at a few images. We'll start with this one. And again, for me, this is a well-executed image, sculpt with a render, but something just doesn't ring true about the jowling in here. And kind of on a larger scale, I will say that this has obviously been executed with symmetry, because I can see perfect symmetry along this center line, which doesn't really work for me, especially when somebody is so baggy. That is exactly when you don't get symmetry, right? Things haven't pulled in, gotten equally inelastic over time, right? Over 50 years, so 60 years. So the symmetry kind of is one thing that's off-putting. The second thing is to do with the jowls, right? And I was able, again, to find the reference that this guy had used. And there's something that doesn't quite ring true about this section over here. And for me, it's to do with kind of the lower face, right? I think that the thing that we have here that works is we know that the mandible is continuous like this underneath the jowl, right? And that the jowl, the superior jowl compartment, just hangs over the edge, right? Substantial overhang, right? I'm not disputing the fact that that's a huge, huge jowl, but that it is in fact lashed back to the mandible on both sides, right? And on this one, the mandible seems to just take a dive down here and mistakenly thinks that jowling just happens along this whole posterior edge, as opposed to being localized in kind of the cheek region, right? So that's kind of the biggest thing for me. I think kind of associated is the distance between here and here has to be just a little bit bigger on his. But that's just a small, minor thing. This is the bigger thing as it relates to what we've just studied anyways. Okay, let's look at this guy. This guy is kind of in the same boat. I'm not sure exactly who it's meant to be, but he's got the same kind of inconsistency along the mandible, and that's kind of why I went into so much detail on the jowling, because it is a very distinct region that this happens, right? And you can be pretty certain that you have only this area to play with. And if you're doing crazy things either edge, I mean, granted, we could put a little tube of fat back here, if somebody's really fat, but this guy obviously isn't, he's just old. So if they're just old, you have masseter, and then you have kind of chin, like we saw countless times, and then you have laxity there in the superficial fascia, whatever's holding this in place, kind of gets relaxed, and you get your sag there. The closest I could find to this guy, that I was thinking that maybe was Hector Salamanca from Breaking Bad. And you can see that he's got chin, right? He's got a little double, a little concavity in the chin. But then he has, and the masseter back here, so the back edge of the mandible, and then he has just a single, really simple jowl, breaking that line, breaking that arc. And the jowl can be that simple, and it doesn't have to do all these acrobatics to try to impress, right? And it probably shouldn't, because it's too much, and it doesn't happen like that generally. Maybe 5 standard deviations out it does, but in general, no. Okay, so what is Ugolino doing in the gallery abominate? Surely my favorite piece is not in the gallery abominate. And it isn't, Carpo is not in the gallery abominate, far from it. But Ugolino-themed pieces tend to attract themselves to the gallery abominate. I think I probably had 1 or 2 in the in the body anatomy gallery abominate, and sure enough, there's another one for the facial anatomy gallery abominate. This one is a drawing from actually a film, Dante's Inferno, which I do intend to watch. It looks kind of interesting. But you can see there's the problem is fairly apparent in here, right? Often people observe lots of bagging under the eyes and think that they'll just draw bags as concentric folds, and that's all that goes into it. We certainly know better, and so the kind of the corrective prescription for this is find the two furrows, infraorbital and nasolabial. And certainly the guy's doing a sneer. I can tell he's doing a sneer because of the expression deepening the nasolabial furrow. And so the infraorbital furrow equally rises. But in the same way that you get a smile, it pops up your malar fat pad, a sneer does the same thing. It just pops it up in a slightly different place. And so that should be malar fat pad. Any kind of bags would happen down here. Tarsal plates would happen down there. And then if there's any kind of wrinkles, they would come down here. Sunglasses, all the rest of the bony structure that we know goes back in here. Okay, a little bit closer on this one. You can kind of see that happening. Okay, let's see, a couple more pieces. This one is a reasonable sculpt. It just really kind of defies a little bit of the structure that we know, both as relates to the skull and as relates to fat. Okay, so as relates to the skull, the ear is growing out of the mandible. So this line of the mandible is taking us to a rotation point up here maybe, as opposed to something more like that, right? Change in plane, change in direction. Master sitting in here. You see the start of the pretty well defined zygomatic arch. But the big problem is the zygomatic arches and the orbit that comes around as you come to the front, right? We have sunglasses, but sunglasses kind of, the orbit dies a death before it before the eye actually sits in there, right? So really this orbit needs to be going in here. Sunglasses can be doing this. And then infraorbital furrows here, nasolabial furrow here, malar fat coming like this. And it means that the eyeball is actually sitting in an orbit as opposed to, as you can see, projecting actually in front of what would be the orbit. Okay, and then a few problems down here, but we will kind of ignore that for now, and we'll just say jowling would happen kind of as we kind of know it happens, just in here, that middle third. Okay, and now the last one for this week is this little piece of game art, and a couple things about this don't quite work for me, and the biggest one is to do with what I'm talking about with these furrows, right? We have our infraorbital furrow going down like this, and we have nasolabial furrow going down like this. If you're at all sensitive to shape, you'll realize that this is a vast expanse of space, the likes of which we've never seen in real life. And that means that there's a problem, right? As soon as you're trying to fit something and it doesn't fit, there's probably cause for concern. Okay, so I think probably the orbit could be a little bit better defined. He's maybe doing a little squint, so maybe the bottom edge raises a bit, but regardless, infraorbital furrow will go like this. We won't correct it too much. The big problem here is what is effectively the nasolabial furrow, right? Which I said goes always above the nostril. And this guy is just a plane change. He's reasonably young. I think this is Drake from one of those games. But his nasolabial furrow, this plane change, is shooting right into the bottom of his nostril, right? And that's a big no-no. It's quite a common problem, actually. The big thing that you want to do to correct this is to make it go over like that. And then, if you have a malar fat pad, even if it's nice and youthful and smeared back, is approximately the right aspect ratio that we're used to seeing, which means that we're in the ballpark for construction of all this stuff. Okay, so I think that's about all I'm going to say on this one. There's other things that kind of bother me, like no superciliary arches, no frontal prominence. Here, no real transition to temporal line, temporalis. Quite generic through here. No glabella, really. The nose just goes straight into the frontal bone. There's no kind of keystone-shaped transition. But we won't talk about that. We'll just leave it here with the malar fats. And that's going to wrap it up for gallery abominant this week. Short and sweet. Hopefully a few things that you've learned not to do anyways. And hopefully that's as helpful as learning what to do. Okay, thanks, and see you next week.